A homeless black man steps in to rescue a white child from a group of bullies and is taken aback when he discovers who the boy's father truly is. The park had always been Malik's haven, a place where he could escape the chaos of life and find a semblance of peace amid the bustling city. It was the place where Malik found some peace, leaning against the coarse bark of a tall oak as life rushed on around him. For a brief moment, Malik could nearly escape the burdens of his life. But then, he heard it, a piercing cry, followed by the mocking laughter of older kids. Malik's gaze shot to the playground, where a small boy, perhaps 7 or 8, was encircled by a group of rough-looking boys. The boy, pale with fear, clung to his backpack as if it were his shield. "Please stop," the boy whimpered, his voice faint beneath the bully's jeers. Malik's fingers clenched tightly around his frayed coat. Instinct told him to steer clear, to avoid getting involved, but then he spotted the group's leader. A tall boy, a sneer etched across his face, shoved the smaller boy, causing him to stumble and fall. "Think you're better than us because your dad's rich?" the leader taunted, kicking dirt toward the boy's face. The others laughed, spurring him further. Malik's heart thudded in his chest. He recognized that look in the bully's eyes. It mirrored the look he'd once seen in his own reflection as a troubled teen, angry and lost. But this boy, he didn't deserve any of it. Nobody did. Without a second thought, Malik got up from under the tree and began walking toward them. His steps were steady but purposeful, each one feeling like a countdown in his head. "Hey," Malik called, his tone firm yet calm. At first, the bullies ignored him, absorbed in their cruel antics. "I said, 'Hey.'" The leader eventually glanced up, his smirk replaced by irritation. "What do you want, old man?" he sneered, masking his surprise with bravado. "Leave him alone," Malik said, his eyes fixed on the group. Though his voice remained calm, its sharpness made the boys hesitate. "And who's gonna make us?" Unaware of the man in front of them, one of the other youngsters stepped back and jeered. Malik stayed silent. He just stared, his steady gaze daring them to challenge him. A moment of silence passed, during which the leader seemed to realize this wasn't a fight he wanted. "Come on, let's go," the leader grumbled, jamming his hands into his pockets. He turned, with the others trailing behind. "This kid's not worth it." Malik's muscles remained taut as he watched them disappear from view. Only then did he shift his focus to the boy on the ground. "You okay, kid?" Malik asked, his tone gentler as he crouched beside him. The boy gazed up at him, his eyes brimming with tears. He nodded, though his small body shook with fear. Malik extended his hand, and after a hesitant moment, the boy accepted it, allowing Malik to help him stand. "Thank you," the boy murmured, clutching his backpack close. "I didn't know what to do." "No need to thank me," Malik replied, brushing dirt off the boy's shoulder. "Those kids are bullies. They're not as tough as they pretend to be." The boy nodded once more, using the back of his hand to wipe his tears. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Malik," he answered with a faint smile. "You shouldn't be out here by yourself. Where are your parents?" "My dad's coming to get me," Ethan said, his eyes darting around the park nervously, as if expecting the bullies to come back. Malik glanced around, finally noting Ethan's expensive clothes and the designer backpack hanging from his shoulder. This boy came from a world entirely different from Malik's, but at that moment none of it mattered. "All right," Malik said, his tone firm yet comforting. "How about I stay with you until he arrives?" Ethan's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and he nodded enthusiastically. Malik guided him to the bench he'd been sitting on earlier, and they sat together, the tension gradually easing. They didn't say much after that, but the silence was peaceful. Ethan seemed calmer, reassured by Malik's presence, knowing he was safe from the bullies. Malik sat still, his eyes on the park's entrance, half bracing for trouble to resurface. After a few minutes, a sleek black car pulled up at the edge of the park. Ethan's face brightened, and he leapt to his feet. Malik stood too, watching as a tall man in a crisp suit exited the car, his gaze immediately landing on Ethan. "Dad!" Ethan shouted, dashing toward him. The man's serious expression softened when he saw his son, and he knelt to embrace him. "Are you all right, Ethan? What happened?" Ethan gestured back at Malik, who stood a few paces away with his hands tucked into his pockets. "Dad, this is Malik. He helped me when some kids were bullying me." James West, Ethan's father, rose and turned to Malik, his expression growing more guarded. "Thank you for helping my son," he said, his voice courteous but reserved. Malik nodded, his gaze briefly meeting James's before shifting downward. "I'm just glad he's okay." James didn't reply right away. Instead, he put a hand on Ethan's shoulder and began leading him toward the car. "We need to go, Ethan. Say goodbye." Ethan glanced back at Malik, a faint frown on his lips. "Bye, Malik." "Thanks." "Take care, kid," Malik responded with a forced smile. He watched them climb into the car and drive away, leaving him alone in the park again. As the car's noise faded, Malik exhaled deeply and returned to his place beneath the tree. He sat down, tugging his coat closer as the autumn breeze began to strengthen. The world continued turning, just as it always had. But today, if only briefly, Malik had made an impact. He leaned into the tree, shutting his eyes. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but for now, he had something to cling to, a reminder that no matter what, he could still make a difference in the world. Malik reclined on the bench, his eyes half shut as he took in the sound of leaves rustling above. The adrenaline from the earlier confrontation ebbed, leaving a dull ache in its wake. Though he hadn't fought, the tension of the moment and the memories it stirred left him drained. Malik assumed the boy would have left with his dad without a second glance, but he sensed someone near him. When he opened his eyes, he saw Ethan standing nearby, holding his backpack close with an uncertain expression. "Can I sit here with you?" Ethan asked softly, his tone unsure. Malik arched a brow in surprise. "Shouldn't you be with your dad?" Ethan glanced toward the park's edge, where the car had disappeared. "He'll be back. He just had to make a call." Malik gave a slow nod. Malik wasn't accustomed to people staying after they got what they needed. Yet something in the boy's eyes, perhaps curiosity or gratitude, kept Malik from dismissing him. He moved over on the bench, leaving space for Ethan. "Sure, kid," Malik said, patting the open spot next to him. "Have a seat." Ethan hopped onto the bench, his legs dangling above the ground. For a while, they sat quietly, the park's ambient sounds filling the space. Malik was fine with the quiet, though he could feel Ethan's gaze on him, as if trying to decipher something. "Why'd you help me?" Ethan asked abruptly, breaking the silence. Malik hesitated before answering. He wasn't used to explaining his actions, least of all to a child. Yet Ethan's sincerity made Malik take the question seriously. "Because you needed help," Malik finally said, his tone low but firm. "Nobody should have to go through that alone." Ethan frowned, his face thoughtful as he tried to understand. "But you don't even know me." Malik let out a soft chuckle, more a breath than a laugh. "I don't need to. Helping doesn't require knowing someone. Sometimes just being there is enough." Ethan appeared to think this over, his brow creased in concentration. "Do you live here?" Ethan asked, glancing around the park like he might spot a hidden house tucked in the trees. "Kind of," Malik replied, sidestepping the question. "I spend a lot of time here." Ethan didn't push the matter, though Malik could see the curiosity spinning in his young mind. The sharpness in Ethan's gaze reminded Malik of himself as a kid, always questioning, always trying to figure out the world. "Do you have kids?" Ethan asked, catching Malik off guard with his straightforwardness. "No, I don't," Malik replied, shaking his head. "Never had a family of my own." Ethan cocked his head, his curiosity shining through. "Why not?" Malik paused, taken aback by the boy's innocent query. How could he sum up the choices the missteps and the cruel turns of fate that brought him here. He didn't want to weigh the boy down with his life story, one more filled with struggles than triumphs. "Life just didn't go that way for me," Malik said plainly, hoping the explanation sufficed. Sensing the topic was sensitive, Ethan nodded and shifted his focus back to the park. For a few moments, they sat in comfortable silence again. Ethan broke the silence, his voice softer now. "Do you ever feel lonely?" Malik blinked, startled by the sudden question. Loneliness was a constant for him, something he hardly admitted, even to himself. It was like an old, tattered coat he wore every day, worn out but familiar. "Sometimes," Malik confessed quietly. "But you learn to live with it." Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he dragged his backpack onto his lap and fidgeted with the zipper. "I feel lonely too," he said at last, his voice so soft Malik barely caught it. Malik glanced at the boy, surprised. Ethan had a dad who obviously cared, and a life that appeared to have everything a kid could ask for. But loneliness didn't play favorites. It found its way into the hearts of both the rich and the poor. "Why do you feel that way?" Malik asked softly, mindful not to press too hard. Ethan shrugged, looking down. "My dad's always working. He's a lawyer, so he's busy a lot. I don't see him much." Malik nodded, comprehending more than he showed. He understood what it felt like to crave someone's time and attention, only for them to remain distant. It was a different form of loneliness, but equally hurtful. "But he cares about you," Malik said, hoping to provide some reassurance. "You can see it in how fast he came when he thought you were in trouble." Ethan gave a small smile at that, though the sadness lingered in his gaze. "Yeah, I know. I just wish he wasn't so busy all the time." Malik had no answer for that. He couldn't promise the boy that things would change or that his dad would become less busy. Life didn't work like that, and Malik wasn't one to offer false promises. Instead, he reached out and gently squeezed Ethan's shoulder. "You're a tough kid. Don't ever forget it." Ethan glanced up at Malik, his eyes wide and inquisitive. For a brief moment, it looked like he might speak, but footsteps interrupted the moment. James West approached them, phone in hand, his frown easing when his eyes landed on Ethan. He slid the phone into his pocket and stepped toward the bench, nodding politely at Malik. "Thanks for looking out for him," James said, his voice still formal but slightly warmer. "No problem," Malik answered, rising from the bench. "I'm just glad he's okay." James rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder, gently urging him to stand. "It's time to go, Ethan." Ethan didn't budge immediately. He glanced up at Malik, a question lingering in his gaze, but he didn't voice it. Instead, he simply nodded, his small hand wrapping around his father's larger one. "Will I see you again?" Ethan asked, hope evident in his tone. Malik glanced at James, whose eyes were cautiously fixed on him, then looked back at Ethan. "Maybe. Take care of yourself, all right?" Ethan gave a small, genuine smile before letting his father guide him away. Malik stood there, watching them leave, his heart feeling slightly less heavy than before. As they walked off, Ethan turned back briefly and waved. Malik raised his hand in response, a rare smile forming on his lips. He lingered in the park until the sun sank below the horizon, the light fading away. For the first time in what felt like ages, the loneliness Malik carried felt a little less burdensome. He had formed a connection, however fleeting, with someone who saw him not as a homeless man, but as a person who mattered. And for now, that was enough. James West tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his thoughts racing as he drove through the city streets. Ethan sat silently in the back, uncharacteristically quiet, his small face resting against the window. James stole a quick glance at his son in the rearview mirror, unease churning within him. Ethan's silence since they'd left the park wasn't lost on James. He could tell something was on his mind. But even more pressing in James's mind was the image of Malik sitting with Ethan on that bench. The man's clothing was shabby and worn, his eyes weary and far away. James had encountered people like Malik before, those living on the edges of society, forgotten and fighting just to get by. He had always maintained his distance, striving to shield Ethan from such a world. It wasn't a lack of empathy, it was the unpredictability and danger of that world that made him cautious. But today, that very world had intersected with his, leaving him feeling uneasy in ways he couldn't quite explain. "Dad?" Ethan's voice cut through the quiet, snapping James out of his thoughts. "Yeah, buddy," James answered, keeping his tone as steady as he could. "Why'd we have to leave so quickly?" Ethan asked softly, disappointment evident in his tone. James drew in a breath, considering his response carefully. "I didn't want to leave you waiting around too long. I know today's been tough." Ethan didn't look convinced by the explanation. He fidgeted in his seat, his small hands toying with the straps of his backpack. "But Malik was nice. He helped me when those boys were being mean." "I know," James replied, his tone softening. "And I'm really thankful he did that." "Then why did you act like you didn't want me to talk to him?" Ethan's question lingered, its innocent delivery tightening something in James's chest. James hesitated, uncertain how to share his concerns without seeming harsh or unfair. He understood the world wasn't simple, but as a father, his instinct was to protect, even if it meant being overly cautious. "Ethan, sometimes people we don't know might be dealing with problems of their own," James said cautiously. "That doesn't mean they're bad, but we have to be careful, especially when we don't know their story." Ethan sat quietly for a moment, mulling over his father's explanation. "But you didn't even talk to him. How do you know he has problems?" James let out a sigh, running his hand through his hair. Ethan was sharp, maybe too sharp sometimes. "It's not just what people say, buddy. Sometimes it's about what you notice. Malik, well, he might be dealing with some hard things. I just want to make sure you're safe." "But I was safe," Ethan argued, his voice tinged with frustration. "He was the only one who helped me when those boys were being mean. He didn't even make any requests. His only goal was to assist." James's frown deepened, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. Ethan's words echoed in his head. It was true. Malik hadn't asked for anything or displayed any hidden motives. However, James was unable to get rid of the lingering uneasiness and the protective instinct that erupted whenever Ethan was around. They arrived at their house, a sleek modern building in a peaceful, affluent neighborhood. The driveway was bordered by meticulously trimmed hedges, with the porch lights flickering on as they neared. James parked the car and turned toward Ethan, who continued gazing out the window. "Ethan, listen," James said softly. "I'm not saying Malik's a bad guy. He might be a good person who just needs help. But as your dad, it's my responsibility to make sure you're safe. Always." Ethan finally turned his gaze to his father, his eyes searching James's expression. "You're always busy, Dad. You're not around much, but today, Malik was there." The words struck James like a blow to the chest. James already knew Ethan missed him and that his demanding work kept him away too often, but hearing it so honestly from his son, without anger or blame, stung even more. James drew a deep breath, his determination softening. "I know, kiddo, and I'm sorry about that. I'll do my best to be around more, all right?" Ethan nodded, though a hint of sadness still lingered in his eyes. "Can we go see Malik again?" James hesitated, unsure how to reply. He wanted to honor Ethan's feelings. Malik had been there when it mattered, yet his instincts warned him to keep Ethan away from potential risks. "I'll think about it," James replied, unwilling to promise something he might not follow through on. "Let's head in and get some dinner, okay?" Ethan nodded once more, his small shoulders sagging a little as he climbed out of the car. James followed him inside, his mind weighed down with thoughts. Normally, the cozy familiarity of home gave James a sense of calm, but tonight the unease remained. Dinner was unusually quiet, their typical conversation replaced by thoughtful silence. Ethan toyed with his food, his thoughts obviously preoccupied. James attempted to spark a conversation, but Ethan's responses were brief, his mind still focused on Malik and what had happened earlier. After they finished eating, Ethan retreated to his room, leaving James by himself at the kitchen table. James leaned back in his chair, staring at his empty plate. His mind swirled with conflicting feelings: gratitude toward Malik for helping Ethan, worry about his intentions, and guilt over how he'd reacted. He couldn't deny that Malik had stepped in when he couldn't, being there for Ethan when it mattered. Yet James's instinct to protect and control the situation had overshadowed his appreciation. Now, he was left questioning whether he'd made the right choice. James rose from the table and headed into his study, where piles of case files and papers cluttered the desk. His work was his world. He excelled at it and was respected for his dedication. But it had also stolen time away from his son, time he'd never recover. James sank into his chair, opening a file, but the text blurred as his focus faltered. All that came to mind was Ethan's face, his quiet disappointment, his yearning for something James often failed to give. James sighed, shutting the file before leaning back in his chair. He realized that work couldn't fix everything, nor could he shield Ethan from every pain. However, he could strive to understand and be present for his son in ways that weren't instinctive for him. And perhaps, just perhaps, that involved giving Malik a chance, a genuine opportunity to show that his intentions were truly good. James decided in his mind to visit the park again, but this time with an open attitude. Maybe Malik wasn't simply a man in need, but someone who could teach them both something about compassion and being present in a world that often pulled people apart. The idea was unsettling, yet it was oddly reassuring. For now, just knowing he could try was enough. That next Saturday started with a clear blue sky, the sort of morning that practically begged for an outing. James could hear the birds singing outside as he sat at the kitchen table, his coffee cup in hand and his mind far away. Ethan was upstairs, still preparing himself. Today, they planned to return to the park. James had struggled with this choice throughout the week. His earlier hesitation about taking Ethan back to the park and possibly running into Malik had slowly shifted into a feeling of obligation. Ethan had been correct. Malik was there for him when it truly counted. The least James could do now was offer the man a fair chance. James wasn't entirely sure what he'd say to Malik if they met him there. Malik had protected his son from harm, and James felt the weight of that debt deeply. Still, a cautious unease lingered that he couldn't fully set aside. James had lived a life of prudence and risk management, both in his personal and professional life. But today, motivated by a combination of thankfulness and the desire to lead by example, he was moving beyond of his comfort zone. "Dad, are we going?" Ethan's voice interrupted James's train of thought. The boy stood at the bottom of the staircase, his face alight with excitement. He had on his favorite baseball cap with a small backpack casually draped over one shoulder. James forced a smile, shoving his doubts aside. "Yeah, let's go. Let's get moving before it gets too warm out." The drive to the park was silent, but it wasn't the tense quiet that had gripped the car earlier that week. Ethan hummed softly to himself, his excitement clear, while James concentrated on the road, his mind spinning with thoughts about what to say if they saw Malik. When they reached the park, it was already alive with activity. Families strolled about, children raced around the playground, and joggers looped the paths. As they walked in, James scanned the park, his eyes automatically searching for the familiar figure he'd seen only days earlier. "Do you think Malik will be here?" Ethan asked, his tone filled with hope. James paused, reluctant to raise Ethan's expectations. "Maybe. We'll find out." They strolled through the park, walking past the spot where Ethan had been harassed. James felt a stab of guilt, remembering how quickly he had wanted to leave that day to get Ethan away from the ordeal. Yet seeing the park brimming with life and activity now, he understood why Ethan wanted to return. There was a certain comfort in the park's familiarity, despite the memories of what had happened. Turning a corner near a group of trees, James spotted Malik sitting on a bench, his body at ease though his eyes remained alert. Malik had on the same worn jacket and faded shirt, yet a sense of calm surrounded him that hadn't been present during their first meeting. Malik appeared deep in thought, his eyes staring off into the distance, until Ethan's excited shout pulled him back. "Malik!" Ethan yelled, sprinting toward the bench. Malik glanced up, surprise flashing across his face before it melted into a warm smile. Rising as Ethan ran up, Malik crouched down to meet him at eye level. "Hey, kid," Malik greeted warmly. "Didn't think I'd see you again this soon." Ethan beamed, his face bright with excitement. "We came back to see you, didn't we, Dad?" James, who had been trailing a few steps behind, reached them. He gave a small nod, feeling a bit awkward, but resolved to move past it. "Yeah, we decided to come by the park again," James said. Malik stood upright, his expression shifting to cautious as he met James's eyes. "I'm glad you did," Malik said simply. An awkward pause followed, neither man seeming to know what to say. Ethan ended the silence, tugging at Malik's hand. "Will you play catch with us?" Ethan asked, his hopeful eyes wide. Malik looked to James as though seeking his permission. James gave a slight nod, adding a faint smile. "All right, if you want," Malik said, his smile reappearing. "Okay. But fair warning, I'm not as quick as I used to be." Ethan giggled, already fishing a small baseball out of his bag. He passed it to Malik and dashed a few steps away, his excitement contagious. James observed as Malik and Ethan started tossing the ball back and forth, their laughter blending with the lively noises of the park. At first, James stayed on the sidelines, quietly watching how Malik engaged with Ethan. There was a natural connection between them that James couldn't help but notice and admire. Malik was patient and encouraging, always quick to retrieve the ball before it stayed down too long. Malik treated Ethan not just kindly but with a level of respect that James increasingly appreciated. "Why not join us?" Malik called to James after a while, tossing the ball his way with a smile. James caught the ball, startled by the unexpected invitation. He hadn't thought he'd be included so quickly, but the sincerity in Malik's voice left no doubt about the offer. Smiling, James joined in, tossing the ball back to Ethan, who caught it with a gleeful shout. The three played catch together, and the tension between James and Malik gradually eased as the game continued. No heavy conversations or probing questions arose, just the pure, shared joy of playing catch. While playing, James felt himself unwind in a way he hadn't in quite a while. He was accustomed to always being in control, to scrutinizing every scenario from every angle. But here, under the sun with Ethan's laughter echoing, he allowed himself to let go of that compulsion, if only briefly. He came to understand that Malik wasn't merely a stranger who had helped his son. Malik was a man with a unique story, his own hardships, and perhaps a need for connection as well. After roughly an hour, they decided to stop, all three a bit tired but grinning. Ethan's cheeks were flushed with joy. His earlier hesitation completely vanished. James could tell how much this experience mattered to Ethan and how much he had needed it. "Thanks for playing with us," Ethan said as they strolled toward the park's exit. "Anytime, kid," Malik said, tousling Ethan's hair. Malik looked to James, his tone taking on a more serious note. "And thanks for giving me a chance." James nodded, locking eyes with Malik. "I'm the one who should be thanking you for what you did for Ethan." I wasn't certain at first, but now I can see you're a good man, Malik." Malik smiled, though a faint sadness lingered in his eyes. "I've made plenty of mistakes, Mr. West, but I'm doing my best to make amends." James thought about that, a wave of understanding washing over him. Everyone had their struggles and regrets. Malik's path had clearly been a tough one, but he was still moving forward, still searching for his way. "Maybe we can help each other," James suggested, surprised by his own offer. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Malik's face showed surprise, but gratitude glimmered in his eyes. "I really appreciate that, more than you realize." They shared a look, a silent understanding passing between them. It wasn't the start of a full friendship, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, a bridge between two very different worlds. As they went their separate ways, Ethan waving goodbye to Malik, James felt a quiet peace settle within him. The doubts that had gnawed at him earlier lingered but were now subdued, overtaken by the sense that he'd made the right decision. Malik had been there for his son when James couldn't, and now in a small way James had reciprocated that kindness. More importantly, he had shown Ethan what it meant to trust and to give people a chance, even when it felt uncertain. For that, James felt a deep pride that warmed him to his core. Driving home with Ethan chatting excitedly in the back seat, James understood that this day had been more than just a trip back to the park. It had been a step forward for them all. The next weekend arrived sooner than James had anticipated. He realized he was looking forward to it, though he wouldn't have said it aloud. The week had been a hectic one, filled with the usual workload of cases and court sessions. Yet in the quiet moments, his mind frequently wandered back to that day at the park, specifically to Malik. James had always taken pride in his knack for reading people. In his profession, it was a skill that often made the difference between success and failure in the courtroom. But Malik had caught him off guard. There was something about Malik that didn't neatly fit into the categories James often used to understand people. Malik had saved his son, that was certain, but there were layers to him that James couldn't yet see but felt compelled to explore. It was this curiosity, coupled with a newfound respect, that prompted James to propose another visit to the park. Ethan was immediately thrilled, practically bouncing with excitement at the suggestion. And so, with a sense of purpose that surprised him, James packed a small cooler with sandwiches and drinks, a gesture that felt simple yet meaningful. They got to the park shortly before noon. The day was warm, but a soft breeze made the heat bearable. Families were out soaking up the sun, and children's laughter echoed through the trees. As they approached the familiar bench, James saw Malik seated in the same spot as before, his body relaxed but his expression pensive. "Dad, there he is," Ethan said, his voice breaking into James's thoughts. Before James could reply, Ethan had already darted ahead. Malik glanced up, a smile spreading across his face when he saw Ethan running toward him. He stood and crouched down, holding up a hand for Ethan to high-five. By the time James reached them, Ethan and Malik were already chatting, with Ethan animatedly sharing stories about his school week. "Hey, Malik," James greeted with a nod as he walked up. "James?" Malik said, standing upright. There was a warmth in his tone now that hadn't been there before, making the exchange feel more sincere. James motioned to the cooler in his hand. "We brought lunch. Want to join us?" Malik's face showed a hint of surprise, but he nodded quickly. "I'd like that," he replied. They chose a spot beneath a large oak tree, its shade offering a pleasant escape from the sun. James laid out a blanket and they all sat down, with Ethan eagerly diving into his sandwich the way only a child could. For a time they ate in a companionable silence, broken now and then by Ethan's cheerful remarks about school or the park. Only after finishing their meal did James decide to bring up the subject that had been on his mind all week. "Malik," James started, his tone measured. "I've been reflecting on what you said last time, about making up for past mistakes." Malik's expression changed, his easy smile fading into a more cautious look. He put his water bottle aside, his hand settling on his lap. "Yeah?" he asked quietly. James nodded, carefully selecting his next words. "I don't mean to pry, but talking about it might help. Sometimes sharing your story can help you move forward." Malik turned his gaze away, focusing on a distant point. For a brief moment, James feared he had crossed a line, pressing too much. But then Malik exhaled deeply, the sound heavy with weariness, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost as if speaking to himself. "It's a long story, James, and not a pleasant one." James gave a small nod, his expression inviting Malik to continue. "I've got time." Ethan, picking up on the change in tone, glanced between Malik and James. "Is it a sad story?" Malik gave a faint smile, though it held no humor. "Yeah, kid, it's a sad story." James rested a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder before turning back to Malik. "We're listening." Malik sat quietly for a moment, piecing together his thoughts. When he spoke at last, his voice was calm, but James could hear an undertone of emotion he hadn't heard before. "I didn't always look like this," Malik began, motioning vaguely to his worn-out clothing and weary demeanor. "I had a life, a decent one by most standards. I grew up in a good neighborhood, went to school, got a job. I worked as a mechanic for years, loved it. There's something honest about fixing what's broken with your own hands." James nodded slowly, focusing intently as Malik went on. "But life doesn't always follow your plans," Malik said, his tone taking on a heavier edge. "I fell in with the wrong crowd. Old friends. We started drinking, doing drugs just to take the edge off. At first, it was just to relax. But before I knew it, I was in too deep. I lost my home, everything." He stopped, swallowing thickly. "I tried getting clean more than once, but it's tough when there's no support, no one who believes in you. Eventually, I gave up. Thought this was just how life was going to be from then on." Ethan stared at Malik with wide eyes, clearly grasping the weight of his story. James felt a constriction in his chest as he listened, Malik's words hanging heavily in the air. "What happened after that?" James asked softly. Malik shrugged, but it lacked the ease of nonchalance. "I drifted around, ended up on the streets just trying to get by. Funny, isn't it? I used to fix things for a living, but I couldn't fix my own life. For a long time, I was angry at myself, angry at the world. But that kind of anger, it eats you up inside." He glanced down at his hands, their calluses and scars a silent reminder of the life he'd endured. "I've been clean for a while now, but it's not easy. Every day's a battle, and some days, I wonder if it's worth the fight." James felt a wave of empathy wash over him for the man sitting nearby. Malik's story was filled with loss and hardship, but it was also one of perseverance. Malik had been through hell, and though he was still here, the road had left its mark. "You're here," James said with conviction. "And that matters. You saved my son, Malik. That proves you're worth something." Malik glanced up, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude, doubt, and hope. "I'm not sure if I believe that," he confessed. "But hearing it helps." Ethan, who had stayed silent while listening, suddenly chimed in. "You're a good person, Malik. You helped me when no one else did." Malik's face softened and he reached out to tousle Ethan's hair. "Thanks, kid. That really means a lot." They all fell silent for a moment, letting the gravity of Malik's words settle between them. James could see how Malik's past had weighed on him, how it had shaped the person he was now. But James also saw something else, a determination to keep moving forward, to set things right, even when it felt impossible. James cleared his throat, his tone steady. "Malik, I want to help. I'm not sure how just yet, but I think we can figure it out together." Malik stared at him, a flash of surprise crossing his expression. "You don't need to do that, James. I've come to terms with where I'm at." "This isn't about pity," James responded firmly. "It's because I believe in second chances, and you've shown me you deserve one." Malik stayed silent for a while, his eyes studying James's face as though searching for a hidden motive, but all he saw was genuine sincerity, and that sincerity was what finally started to chip away at the walls he had constructed around himself. "All right," Malik said at last, his voice soft. "I'm not sure where to begin, but all right." James smiled, a renewed sense of purpose washing over him. "We'll take it one step at a time." While they gathered their things to leave the park, James felt an unexpected sense of hope. Malik's journey was far from finished, with battles still ahead, but for the first time, James felt they were heading in the right direction. Ethan walked between them, his small hands holding onto Malik on one side and James on the other, The sun began to sink, casting long shadows over the park, though the air still held its warmth. As they strolled, James couldn't help but feel that, in some small way, they were all starting to heal. And maybe, just maybe, this marked the beginning of something new. A chance for all of them to seek the redemption they needed. Together. Monday morning arrived with its typical rush, but James carried a quiet anticipation. James had arranged a meeting for Malik, a job interview at a nearby auto repair shop. The shop had a solid reputation for quality work and community outreach, and James thought it could be a perfect fit for Malik, considering his experience as a mechanic. While driving Ethan to school, James glanced at the clock. He realized there was still some time left before the interview. Ethan, normally chatty, was uncharacteristically quiet, his usual energy replaced by a pensive silence. "Looking forward to school today?" James asked, trying to break the silence. Ethan shrugged and avoided meeting his dad's gaze. "Yeah, I guess." James could sense that something else was on Ethan's mind. "Everything all right?" Ethan glanced up, his eyes reflecting a mix of hope and worry. "I just really hope Malik gets the job. He's so nice, Dad. I want him to be happy." James smiled, a wave of pride washing over him at Ethan's empathy. "Me too, buddy. Malik deserves a chance to rebuild his life. We'll do all we can to help him." Ethan nodded, a small spark of optimism lighting up his face. "I know you're helping him, Dad. Thanks for that." They reached the school and James pulled Ethan into a quick hug before watching him disappear inside. Driving off, James found his thoughts drifting back to Malik. He hoped the interview would turn out well, though he was aware of the obstacles ahead. Malik's history was bound to surface, and James wasn't sure how the shop owner might respond. At the repair shop, James arrived early to ensure everything was prepared. The shop was lively with mechanics attending to cars in different stages of repair. The sharp scents of motor oil and gasoline filled the air, mingling with the clinking of tools and the hum of engines. Rick, the shop's burly owner, greeted James with a firm handshake. Rick, despite his gruff demeanor, was known for being fair and offering people opportunities. "Morning, James," Rick greeted, wiping his hands with a rag. "You ready for this?" James nodded, a blend of nerves and determination stirring within him. "Yeah, Malik should arrive any minute now." Rick checked the clock. "We've got a few minutes. Let me give you a quick tour while we wait." James trailed Rick through the shop, taking in the controlled chaos around him. The shop was clean and orderly, with tools and machinery neatly organized throughout. Rick described the shop's operations, his pride in his craft shining through. "What's the story with this Malik guy?" Rick asked while they walked. James drew a deep breath, carefully considering his response. "Malik's been through some tough times lately, but he's got solid experience in mechanics. He's working to turn things around, and I think he's worth the shot." Rick gave a slow nod, his face reflecting a thoughtful expression. "Everyone has a past, James. What matters is what they do with it." Before James could reply, the shop door swung open and Malik walked in. Malik appeared anxious. His clothes were clean but worn, and a small duffel bag was slung over his shoulder. As Malik came closer, James could clearly see the combination of determination and nervousness on his face. "Hey, Malik," James said, greeting him with an attempt at a reassuring smile. Malik gave a small smile in return, though it carried hesitation. "Hi, James." Rick stepped up, reaching out his hand. "Rick, glad you're here. Ready for the interview?" Malik shook Rick's hand and nodded. "Yes, sir. As ready as I'll ever be." "Great. Let's get started," Rick said, leading Malik toward a small office in the back of the shop. James followed and took a seat on one of the chairs outside the office as Rick shut the door behind them. The interview started with basic questions about Malik's experience and skill set. James listened through the thin walls, picking up fragments of Malik's responses. Malik talked about his past work, his abilities in fixing different kinds of vehicles, and his dedication to staying clean. Malik's voice was steady, though James could detect a faint hint of uncertainty in it. After some time, the office door opened and Malik stepped out, his face showing a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Rick came out behind him, his face giving nothing away. "Thanks for coming in, Malik," Rick said, extending a firm handshake. "We'll get in touch soon." Malik accepted the handshake with a nod, and then turned toward James. "How'd it go?" James could see the tension in Malik's eyes and the way he carried himself. "I think it went well," James replied, making an effort to sound optimistic. Rick seemed interested. Malik gave a small smile that carried a glimmer of hope. "I hope so." They walked out of the shop together, Malik's steps measured and reflective. James could feel the significance of the moment, the mix of hope and doubt Malik carried with him. "Want to grab a coffee or something?" James asked, hoping to offer Malik some encouragement. Malik shook his head but looked genuinely appreciative. "No, thanks. I think I just need some time to think." James gave a nod, understanding his need for space. "All right. Just remember, no matter what happens, you've got support. We're in this together." Malik nodded, his eyes meeting James's with a blend of gratitude and nervous energy. "I appreciate it." "Thanks, James." As Malik headed off, James watched him go, a pang of empathy stirring within him. He realized the interview's result was still uncertain, but he deeply admired Malik's bravery and resolve. James drove back home, the events of the day pressing heavily on his thoughts. He hoped Malik would land the job, that this could be the fresh start he desperately needed. More than that, James wished for Malik to discover a sense of purpose and connection, something that had been absent from his life for so long. When James got home, Ethan was already back from school, his face lit up with excitement. "How'd it go? Did Malik get the job?" James sat next to him, giving a reassuring smile. "We don't know yet. Rick said he'll get back to him soon." Ethan's expression faltered a bit, but he quickly tried to stay positive. "I hope he gets it. He really deserves the opportunity." James put an arm around Ethan, a swell of pride rising in him at his son's steadfast support for Malik. "Me too, buddy. Me too." They spent the evening together, the mood in the house warm and inviting. James caught himself reflecting on all that had happened during the day. While getting ready for bed, James felt a refreshed sense of purpose. Helping Malik wasn't just an act of kindness, it was an opportunity to make a meaningful impact, to provide support and compassion in a world that so often lacked them. As James closed his eyes, he hoped Malik would find the chance he needed to rebuild his life, and that in some small way, he had contributed to that journey. Wednesday began with a gentle drizzle, the kind that made the city streets wet and gleaming. James had wrapped up his morning routine and was sipping coffee at the kitchen table when his phone vibrated on the counter. The screen lit up with Rick's name. His heart jumped slightly. He'd been anticipating this call. He drew a deep breath and picked up the phone. James West speaking. "Hey, James?" Rick's voice came across, direct and no nonsense. "Got a minute to chat?" "Of course," James answered, keeping his tone casual despite the excitement building in his chest. "Just wanted to let you know, we're offering Malik the job," Rick said. "He'll start on Monday." James felt a surge of relief rush through him. "That's fantastic news." "Thanks, Rick." "No problem," Rick replied. "Malik's got talent. He just needs a chance, and I think he'll do fine here." After hanging up, James leaned back in his chair, a contented smile forming on his face. Malik had succeeded. He'd landed the job. James understood this was only the start of Malik's journey, but it was a crucial first step. He could hardly wait to tell Malik the good news. Without delay, he grabbed his jacket and stepped out the door. The drizzle continued outside, but James hardly noticed as he made his way to the park. Upon arriving, James found the park quieter than usual, with the rain keeping most people away. James looked around and spotted Malik sitting on their familiar bench. His body seemed at ease, but his gaze was fixed on the ground. "Malik," James called as he walked toward him. Malik glanced up, his face giving nothing away. "I've got some news." Malik rose to his feet, a glimmer of curiosity appearing in his eyes. "Good news, I hope." James nodded, struggling to keep his excitement in check. Rick called, "You start Monday." Malik's eyes grew wide, and for a second he said nothing. Then a wide smile spread across his face, filled with both relief and joy. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," James replied, his smile widening. "Rick mentioned he was impressed by your skills. This is your opportunity to rebuild." Malik exhaled deeply, the tension visibly leaving his shoulders. "Thank you, James. I didn't know what would happen. I was worried I might have blown it." "You didn't," James assured him. "You were up front, and you demonstrated your abilities. That's what matters." Malik's smile stayed firmly in place. "I've been waiting for an opportunity like this for so long. It means more to me than you realize." James nodded, a wave of satisfaction washing over him. "I'm glad. And remember, if you ever need anything, just tell me. This is a fresh start for you." As they walked side by side, Malik appeared more at ease, his demeanor lighter. The rain had softened to a faint drizzle, and the park's colors stood out sharply against the gray sky. James could see how deeply the job offer resonated with Malik, like a ray of hope piercing a long, dark tunnel. "Have you told anyone else yet?" James asked as they neared the playground where Ethan was busy playing. Malik shook his head slowly. "Not yet. I figured I'd wait until it was certain." James nodded, fully understanding. "Well, I know Ethan will be excited to hear about it." They arrived at the playground just as Ethan dashed toward them, his face full of eager curiosity. "What's going on? Did Malik get the job?" James smiled, tousling Ethan's hair. "He did. Malik starts on Monday." Ethan's face lit up, brimming with excitement. "That's amazing, Malik. You're going to do great." Malik chuckled, the sound full of genuine happiness. "Thanks, kid. I sure hope so." They spent the remainder of the afternoon in the park, their conversation flowing effortlessly. Malik and Ethan played together on the swings, laughing and chatting about everything from school to the upcoming job. James observed them with a feeling of satisfaction, noticing how much Malik's presence had already started to positively influence Ethan's life. As the sun began to dip, streaking the sky with shades of orange and pink, James felt a deep sense of achievement. Malik's new job represented more than just a step toward financial security. It was an opportunity for a fresh beginning, a path to rebuilding and discovering a renewed sense of purpose. When it was time to go, Malik accompanied James and Ethan to their car. He turned toward James, his expression both serious and hopeful. "I really can't thank you enough for this, James. It means so much." James placed a comforting hand on Malik's shoulder. "You've earned it. Just keep putting in the effort and have faith in yourself. That's all anyone can ask." Malik nodded, his eyes reflecting deep gratitude. "I will, and I'll never forget this." As they exchanged goodbyes, James felt a renewed sense of hope. The journey ahead for Malik remained uncertain, but the job offer marked a pivotal moment. It was an opportunity to prove himself, achieve stability, and bring about a positive shift in his life. On the drive home, Ethan spoke excitedly about Malik's new job, his energy contagious. James listened, a profound sense of fulfillment washing over him. He had extended help to someone in need, making a meaningful difference in their lives in the process. As the car came to a stop in their driveway and the evening fell over their neighborhood, James looked at his son, grateful for their bond and the chance to assist others. The future always held uncertainties, but for the first time in a while, it felt filled with hope and promise. Malik's first day on the job came with a blend of excitement and nervousness. James could tell Malik had woken up early. Malik's eagerness was evident, but so was his nervousness. James had offered Malik a ride to the shop, a supportive gesture Malik gladly accepted. In the car, James and Malik watched the city go by in a haze of early morning activity. While they drove through the city, its early morning activity rushing by, Malik sat in the passenger seat, gripping the edge of his jacket and staring out at the streets. "You ready for this?" James asked, aiming for a casual tone. Malik glanced at James, his eyes showing a trace of doubt. Yeah, nervous, but I'm ready. It's been a while since I've done this. James gave a small nod. Feeling nervous is normal, but you've got the skills. Just focus on demonstrating what you're capable of. Malik gave a slight smile, though it carried a hint of apprehension. Thanks for the ride. I know it's a small thing, but it really means a lot. No problem, James replied. You've done a lot for us. This is the least I can do. When they arrived at the shop, James saw the morning shift was already in full swing with activity all around. Mechanics moved in and out, the clinking of tools echoing, and the air heavy with the scent of motor oil and gasoline. James parked the car and looked over at Malik. This is it. Just take things one step at a time. You've got this. Malik nodded and drew in a deep breath. All right. I'll see you after work. Absolutely, James said, patting him on the shoulder reassuringly. Good luck. Malik stepped out of the car and walked toward the shop. James watched him leave, his heart swelling with hope and encouragement. It was a significant day for Malik, and James understood it was just the start of a challenging yet fulfilling path. While driving home, James thought about Ethan, who was eagerly anticipating updates about Malik's first day. When James arrived, Ethan was already at the door, his face glowing with curiosity. How'd it go? Ethan asked, his eyes wide with excitement. James crouched to Ethan's level and gave him a reassuring smile. Malik's first day went great. He was a little nervous, but he's got the skill, and that's a big step forward. Ethan's face broke into an excited grin. That's amazing, I'm so happy for him. James tousled Ethan's hair, pride swelling in him at his son's positive spirit. Me too, buddy. Malik has a real chance to turn things around, thanks to the people who believe in him. The day unfolded with the usual routine of work and chores, but James frequently checked his phone, hoping for a message or call from Malik. By late afternoon, while wrapping up some work at home, James's phone buzzed with a text. The message was from Malik. First day went great. I'm tired but feeling good. Thanks for everything. James read the text, feeling relieved and satisfied. Malik's first day had gone smoothly, which was an encouraging sign. When Ethan returned from school, he was brimming with questions. How's Malik? Did he tell you anything about his day? James nodded and showed Ethan the message. He said his day went well. He's tired, but he's feeling good about it. Ethan smiled widely. That's awesome. I can't wait to see him again. Later that evening, as James and Ethan sat down for dinner, the doorbell rang. James opened the door to see Malik standing on the porch, looking tired but content. Hey Malik, James said, stepping aside to invite him in. How was your first day? Malik walked in, a grateful smile spreading across his face. It went well. It was busy, but good. Everyone was friendly, and I think I'll fit in here just fine. Ethan dashed over to greet Malik, his excitement clear. Did you fix any cars today? Malik chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. I sure did. I worked on a couple of engines and did some regular maintenance. It felt great to be back at it. James observed a noticeable change in Malik's demeanor. The earlier nervousness had been replaced with a calm confidence. It was obvious that the job meant more than just earning a paycheck. It was a way for Malik to rediscover a piece of himself. As they sat down for dinner, James and Malik discussed the day, with Malik sharing little stories and details about his work. The conversation flowed naturally, and it was evident that Malik was starting to feel more comfortable in his new position. After dinner, James and Malik helped Ethan with his homework, with Malik providing tips and motivation. While Ethan tackled his math problems, the evening unfolded in a relaxed rhythm, filled with laughter and easy conversation, underscoring how much Malik's presence was already enriching their lives. When Malik eventually said his goodbyes and left, James felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Malik's first day had been a success, and the positive shifts were already noticeable. This wasn't just about the job. It was about the hope and fresh starts that came with the opportunity. As James and Ethan wound down for the night, James found himself reflecting on how much progress Malik had made in such a brief period. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its difficulties, but Malik was steadily on the path to rebuilding his life, one step at a time. While tucking Ethan into bed, James felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Supporting Malik wasn't merely an act of kindness. It had been an opportunity to make a meaningful difference, to aid someone on their path toward a brighter future. James kissed Ethan goodnight, turned off the light, and felt a renewed sense of optimism for the days ahead. The future was never guaranteed, but with every step forward it seemed a little more promising. Malik's first few weeks on the job were a flurry of activity. Mornings started early, with Malik reaching the shop before the workday began, eager to hit the ground running. By now he'd found a rhythm, but the shadow of his past still loomed, turning each day into a delicate balance between newfound stability and lingering doubts. James could see Malik's confidence growing, but also noticed faint traces of strain. One evening, during the tail end of dinner, Malik appeared distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. Ethan was animatedly sharing a story from school, but Malik only half listened, lost in thought. "Hey Malik, everything all right?" James asked, picking up on Malik's distracted mood. Malik glanced up, his expression briefly guarded before he managed a small smile. "Yeah, just a tough day. Nothing to worry about." James wasn't fully convinced but decided to let it go. He could sense that Malik was trying to manage things alone, likely hesitant to burden anyone else with his troubles. It wasn't uncommon for someone in Malik's situation to bear their struggles silently. The next morning on his way to the office, James noticed Malik sitting on the steps of his modest apartment building. Malik was toying with his phone, his brow creased in thought. James paused briefly before deciding to approach him. "Morning, Malik," James greeted, adopting a casual tone. "Everything okay?" Malik glanced up, a brief look of surprise flashing across his face. "Oh, hey, James. Yeah, just a rough morning. I've got a couple of things I'm trying to figure out." James gave a nod, sensing that Malik's problems ran deeper than a tough morning. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Malik paused briefly, then shook his head. "No, it's just some money issues. I've got a few bills stacking up and it's been kind of overwhelming." James listened, a wave of empathy hitting him. He understood that financial stress could greatly compound the challenge of rebuilding one's life. "If you need help or even just some advice, I'm here. Sometimes talking about it can really help." Malik gave an appreciative nod but was visibly hesitant to take the offer. "Thanks, James. I'll figure it out. I don't want to trouble you." James placed a comforting hand on Malik's shoulder. "It's no trouble at all. Everyone needs a bit of help now and then." As James drove to work, he couldn't shake the worry lingering in his mind for Malik. He realized that the combined stress of a new job and financial troubles was a significant weight on Malik's shoulders. It was obvious that Malik was making a strong effort to stay on track, but the difficulty was equally apparent. Later in the day, James was at his office when a call from Malik came in. The conversation sounded professional, but James could hear an undertone of strain in Malik's voice. "Hey, James, I might need to shift my schedule a little. Work's been hectic, and I've got some personal stuff I need to handle." James could pick up on the strain in Malik's tone. "Is everything all right?" Malik paused before replying. "Yeah, I'm just handling a lot at the moment. I'll manage, but I might need a little time to sort everything out." James felt the urge to offer more help, but was mindful of Malik's pride. "All right, just let me know if you need anything. We're here to back you up." After their call, James couldn't stop thinking about Malik for the rest of the day. He understood that supporting someone without crossing boundaries was a tricky balance. It was clear Malik was grappling with more than just the hurdles of a new job. The burden of past errors and present financial strain was clearly wearing on him. That evening, James resolved to visit Malik's apartment, hoping to provide some concrete support. James knocked and Malik opened the door, looking surprised but genuinely happy to see him. "Hey, James. What's going on?" Malik asked, his tone sounding more at ease than it had during their earlier call. "I just came by to check in," James said, stepping into the apartment. "How are things really going?" Malik let out a sigh, a trace of relief evident in his eyes. "It's been rough. I'm trying to keep up with my bills, and work's been pretty demanding. I guess I didn't expect everything to pile up like this." James sat down at the modest dining table, his eyes catching a pile of unopened bills and paperwork. "I know it's not easy. How about we look through some of this together? I might be able to help you figure out a few options or resources." Malik glanced at the papers, his shoulders sinking just a little. "I'd really appreciate that. I didn't want to admit it, but it's been a bit much to handle." As they combed through the documents, James provided practical advice and outlined possible solutions, helping Malik see his options more clearly. They spent the evening going over budgeting strategies, potential assistance programs, and other ways to manage Malik's finances more efficiently. By the time the night wrapped up, Malik appeared noticeably more at ease, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "Thanks, James. I didn't realize how much I really needed this." James nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. "No problem. You've been doing great, and everyone needs a little help now and then." As James stepped out of Malik's apartment, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Helping Malik through these struggles was more than just an act of kindness. It was a way to assist him in rebuilding his life one step at a time. The challenges were significant, but the support from friends and community was equally strong. Back at home, Ethan was fast asleep, likely dreaming of Malik's new job and their blossoming friendship. James thought about how far Malik had come already, and how vital it was to keep offering support during this critical period. James eased into his evening routine, feeling a blend of weariness and contentment. Malik's journey forward was still riddled with challenges, but James was determined to support him every step of the way. This was about far more than just a job. It was about providing a lifeline and playing a role in Malik's journey toward a brighter tomorrow. As James turned out the lights and prepared for bed, he felt a quiet assurance that despite the difficulties, things were moving in the right direction. With every small step, Malik was edging closer to overcoming his past and discovering a renewed sense of hope and stability. The days had started to settle into a routine of early mornings and lengthy hours. For Malik, his commitment to the job was clear, but so was the fatigue that accompanied it. In spite of the financial pressure and emotional challenges of rebuilding his life, Malik was starting to rediscover a sense of purpose in his work. Yet it was evident that he was still wrestling with the remnants of his past, which lingered even in his moments of progress. One Friday evening, James and Ethan planned a visit to Malik's apartment with a small gesture of support. Ethan was excited to show Malik a drawing he'd made at school, and James figured it would be a nice way to cheer Malik up. They got there just as Malik was wrapping up a late shift, with the faint hum of car engines and the distant city sounds surrounding them. Malik opened the door, his face brightening as he saw James and Ethan standing there. "Hey, James." "Ethan, what's brought you two over?" Ethan proudly held up his drawing, smiling brightly. "I made this at school. It's a picture of the park where we play. I thought you'd like it." Malik took the drawing, his gaze softening as he studied it. "Wow. This is incredible, Ethan. Thanks. It's nice to have a reminder of the park." James observed Malik's posture ease slightly as he admired the drawing. "We thought it might brighten your day," James said as he stepped in. "How's work been?" Malik let out a sigh, his exhaustion visibly apparent. "It's been busy, but I'm managing. I'm still getting used to the pace, but it's improving." Ethan roamed around the modest apartment, observing the details of Malik's new setup. "Do you have any plans this weekend, Malik?" Malik gave a small shake of his head. "Not much. I was planning to get some rest and maybe tidy up a bit around here." James nodded, understanding that Malik could use some downtime. "Why don't we help you out? We can organize a bit, then maybe grab something to eat afterward. Taking time for yourself is important. Malik glanced at them, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and hesitation. I'd really appreciate that. It's been a while since I had a chance to unwind. They spent the next couple of hours tidying up and organizing Malik's apartment. Ethan enthusiastically pitched in, sorting items and arranging them into neat piles. Though visibly tired, Malik appeared to appreciate the company and the break from his daily stresses. While they worked, James started a conversation with Malik. "You've come a long way. It's not just about the job, it's about rebuilding your life, and you're doing great." Malik glanced around the apartment, absorbing the now organized space and the cozy atmosphere of the evening. "It feels nice to have some order. It's been tough, but I'm starting to see things get better." James noticed a shift in Malik's demeanor. The weight of his past was still present, but it seemed to be lightening. Sometimes it's the little victories that matter most. "You're making real progress, Malik. Don't forget, it's okay to ask for help when you need it." Malik nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I've been trying to deal with everything by myself, but I'm starting to see that asking for help isn't a weakness. It's part of moving forward." As the evening wound down, they decided to head out for dinner. Malik picked a nearby cozy diner he'd recently come across. As they shared burgers and fries, the conversation flowed effortlessly, and the mood was light and easygoing. Ethan animatedly talked about school and his recent adventures, while James and Malik discussed work, life, and everything else in between. Malik appeared much more comfortable, his laughter sincere and his attitude noticeably more relaxed. It was evident that the encouragement and camaraderie were aiding him in navigating the challenges of his new life. After dinner, they strolled back to Malik's apartment, where James and Ethan said their goodbyes. Malik lingered at the doorway, a sincere smile lighting up his face. "Thanks for today. It honestly made a difference." James rested a comforting hand on Malik's shoulder. "Anytime. We're in this together. Don't hesitate to let us know if you need anything." Malik nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I won't forget it. It really means a lot to me." During the drive home, Ethan sat quietly, lost in thought. James glanced at him, curious about what was on his mind. "What's on your mind, kiddo?" Ethan turned toward his dad, his face thoughtful. "I think Malik's starting to feel happy again. He seems different, like he's figuring things out." James smiled warmly, moved by his son's thoughtful observation. "He is. It's a journey, but he's getting there. And your drawing really helped too." Ethan lit up with pride at the acknowledgement. "I'm glad. I just want him to be happy." Once they were back home and settling in for the evening, James reflected on the day's events. Malik was beginning to gain a fresh perspective, and though the journey ahead was still tough, there was now a renewed sense of hope and opportunity. James recognized that Malik's journey was far from complete, but the encouragement of friends and those small forward steps were having a real impact. This wasn't solely about landing a job or handling finances. It was about regaining confidence, rediscovering joy, and embracing a fresh start. As James tucked Ethan into bed and said goodnight, a deep sense of contentment filled him. Supporting Malik through his struggles had been a meaningful effort, and it was evident that it was beginning to pay off. The future remained uncertain, but with every step Malik took, it seemed a bit brighter. James switched off the light and made his way to his own room, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and optimism. The journey was far from over, but the positive changes were a testament to the strength of support, friendship, and the resilience of the human spirit. It seemed a bit lighter. With a fresh sense of direction and optimism, James switched out the light and made his way to his own room. Although the trip was still ongoing, the positive developments demonstrated the strength of friendship, support, and the human spirit's tenacity.